Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to Christmas at the Movies. For the next few weeks, we're going to be unpacking some popular Christmas movies, pulling some great truth from movies. And if you're brand new with us, welcome. We don't do movies every week, but we do sometimes. And our hope in the series is not only are we going to have some fun with enjoying some clips from different movies over the next few weeks, but hopefully you never watch movies the same again. Hopefully, more than just entertainment, you recognize that movies communicate something. They tell a story, and in that story, it's either filled with truth or it's riddled with falsehoods or a little bit of both. So we're going to jump in today with our first movie in this series for Christmas. Some may even argue it's not exactly a Christmas movie, but it's a great one to start the series with. It's the movie is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe from the movie series, The Chronicles of Narnia. Chronicles of Narnia was originally a popular children's book series written by author C.S. Lewis. In fact, how many of you have read at least some of the Chronicles of Narnia? Okay, it's been around for longer than all of us, so it's been around for a bit. Lewis's book series is not only this timeless classic, but then it became movie series, and it's filled with the allegory about God and about Jesus and all the different things about the world he created. And as we launch into the Christmas season, it's going to help us get our mind set on that incredible gift that God gave us when he sent Jesus to earth. Now, the very first book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, now turned into the movie, is a story of 4 World War II era children who are living in London. There's bombings in the city, so they send them away to safety in the English countryside. They live with this professor in a large mansion with many rooms. And during a game of hide and seek, the youngest of the 4, Lucy, stumbles upon an old wardrobe. And in the back of the wardrobe, there's a magical passage into the land of Narnia. And that is where the magic really begins. And that's where we start. Take a look at this clip. I know, it's a horrible place to stop, right? Just getting going. And Narnia is this world filled with talking animals and mythical creatures like the one we're about to meet in that scene, this fawn named Mr. Tumnus. And he, as a pretty good little fawn, but he's scared, and he decides to even turn Lucy over to the villain in the story, the White Witch. The evil witch has put a spell over the entire land and turned it into this forever state of winter in Narnia. Spring never comes, and Christmas never comes. In fact, Tumnus is famously quoted a little bit later as he's talking with Lucy in saying this phrase, that in Narnia, it is always winter, never Christmas. When you think about it, sometimes it feels like that in life. It certainly was like that at times in the Bible for the people of God. It's a terrible thought, right? Like to be stuck like that. Unable to really look forward to anything. Perhaps the darkest season in the entire Bible is a part of the Bible that's actually not there. It's actually the period of time between the Old Testament and the New Testament, between the books of Malachi and Matthew in our Bibles. And for us, it just jumps from one to the next. But in the history of the world, there were 400 years in that what's called the intertestamental period. 400 years of virtually complete darkness, spiritually speaking. And during that time, there was no word from God at all. Generation after generation after generation, they never had a word from God. I'm sure the people of God in that period of time felt like it was always winter, never Christmas. And I wonder, have you ever felt like that in your life where maybe you faced a difficult season where it felt like it was winter all the time, like Christmas never came? Christmas is like the reprieve from winter. At least we got Christmas to look forward to. You ever feel like you're waiting for something, some change or some breakthrough from God, but the thing has never come? Maybe you wonder when and if God's ever going to come through. I've heard some stories like that. I'm sure you have too. I know right now a guy whose wife now has cancer for the 3rd time. They've prayed and they've prayed and they've given it to God, and they've beat cancer twice, and they told her this last time there was a very low percentage chance that cancer would come back, but here it is again. For them, it feels like always winter, never Christmas. Or some folks I know about who have been praying and waiting and praying and waiting, longing to have a child of their own. And for years, they've faithfully given that to God. No baby. Always winter, never Christmas. Or the single guy who has been patiently waiting for God to bring somebody into his life. He'd long to have a wife and spend the rest of their lives together, but that person has never come. And it seems like God's answer to his prayer is already 10 years too late. Always winter, never Christmas. Or the married couple that they're married, but honestly, it doesn't really feel like it most of the time. They spend most days wondering when they're going to pull out of the winter they're in. Always winter, never Christmas. Other people are stuck in a habit they can't seem to kick, or waiting for a house to sell, or hoping that the job will soon turn up, or waiting for the illness to take a turn for the good. But winter just seems to keep on going. And some of us have been waiting and waiting and waiting for that figurative Christmas for a long time, waiting for a switch to flip so we can finally have hope. See, when we're living in endless winter, hope sometimes is really hard to come by. Hope seems to grow when there's something to hope in, when we feel like we can see out the light at the end of the tunnel. A change is coming, a new day is coming. And when it doesn't, man, it just feels sometimes like we can be so hopeless. And you know why it seems so wrong, so off to face those difficult winters like that? You know why we aren't okay with it when we're dealing with a difficult day like that? Because we just somehow know it's not supposed to be like this. There is something better than endless winter in life. Ecclesiastes 3, verse 11, I think gives us the answer. Here's why that doesn't settle well. Verse 11 says this: God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity into the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. We can't see the entire journey of what God's doing. We can just know that there's times where it feels like we're in winter, and he has planted, or another way that the Hebrew word is translated is stitched eternity into our hearts. We don't ever separate ourselves from longing for hope. There's no escaping that deep down we know winter isn't the end, because God gave us something more into the very fiber of our hearts. He put hope in our hearts, and so even when we can't see a way out, we know there's more. We know that's not supposed to be the end. And that's one reason why stories like Narnia resonate with us so much. We've never been through I haven't ever been through a wardrobe into an enchanted kingdom. Maybe you have, I don't know. But we long to see things made right in life. We want winter to end. We long for hope on the other side. And when the winter of hopelessness lingers, it leads us down a lot of times one of two very clear paths. Maybe you've been there. You don't see it ending. Sometimes what we can do is downplay the difficult season, try to pretend it's not there, sort of stuff all of our emotions down. Maybe if we just tell ourselves that it isn't that cold in winter, maybe it'll go away soon enough and the damage won't be done. Maybe it'll just pass on its own. Or we kind of go the opposite extreme and we try to take matters into our own hands. If spring's not going to come on its own, we're going to force it in. We're going to try to make it come. We just pave our own path, and we give into our own desires, and we do what we feel like we want to do because, you know what, winter needs to end sometime. I'm just going to end it myself. A lot of the characters in the story of Narnia are full of allegory, and the third child of the four, Edmund, in a lot of ways, he represents humanity. He represents all of us in our fallen state, feeling justified in our positions and in our opinions, and we're ready to take matters into our own hands. A lot of times we often choose to suit our own pleasures above everything else because, after all, we've been through winter. That's certainly what happened with Edmund when he made his way into the wardrobe. Unfortunately for Edmund, the very first character that he met in Narnia was the evil White Witch herself. Take a look. I had a guy earlier say that his kids think that he has one of those little chalices where he can just put drips on the ground and money just grows, and it's not real. Edmund's lured into temptation by the White Witch, and he becomes a major central character in the story because ultimately he betrays his family and he betrays the real king, Aslan. There's an internal battle in Edmund throughout the whole story. The White Witch, and Lewis's story, is the enemy. It's Satan. And notice that the witch, while not exactly like a warm character, she disguises herself as kind and giving, and she lures him in, encouraging him to fulfill whatever his personal desires are. But her motives for him are ultimately evil, as she's going to try to eliminate him and all of his siblings as a threat to the throne of Narnia. Despite all of her gifts and all of her offers to help Edmund please himself, the goal ultimately is not for him, but to harm him. And in describing the enemy in Scripture, the Apostle Paul writes this in 2 Corinthians 11. He says about Satan, even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. He disguises himself. The enemy, it is clear who the enemy is, but he doesn't show up looking like an enemy. In your life and mine, if Satan, known as the tempter, if he came looking like a bad guy, we would know better, right? We're like, nope, bad guy. Staying away from you. We would reject him immediately. But he's way more sly than that. He's cunning and he's attractive. And he tempts us in ways that at the moment seem very fulfilling to us. He gives us what we want for the moment. Sometimes the winter we experience in life is because we just keep eating Turkish delight that he's putting on our plate. He's laying it out for us, and we keep going deeper and deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole of our sin. And friends, sin never ends well. It always causes harm and destruction on the other side. It always does. The Apostle Paul gives us a clear warning about that. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, beginning in verse 12, he says this: if you think you're standing strong, be careful not to fall. The temptations in your life are no different from what others experience, and God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you're tempted, he will show you a way out so that you can endure. Notice the contrast between our God and the enemy. God is faithful. He's always coming through for us. The enemy is always deceiving, always bringing ultimately to us to our destruction. That's his end game. Some have pointed out a connection in this passage to a popular phrase. Maybe you've heard this phrase before. Have you heard the phrase, God will never give you more than you can handle? Anybody heard that before? Somebody's told you that, or maybe you've actually shared that with someone trying to encourage them through a hard time. Here's the thing I hate to tell you today. It's not true. That's not in the Bible. God never promised us that we would not have in life more than we can handle. In fact, sometimes life does give us more than we can handle. Sometimes there are crazy long, difficult winters, and we don't have the strength to get through those on our own. That's one of the reasons why his presence in our lives is so critical and so meaningful. He walks with us and even carries us through the difficult seasons. He doesn't say it's not going to be overwhelming. It will be. He promises in this passage that we'll never be tempted beyond what we can handle. The Turkish delight, if you will, and there's a lot better desserts than Turkish delight, let's be honest. The Turkish delight is never so strong that we can't choose God's way. Even when we've partaken it for a long time, we can choose to walk away. There's always a way out of our temptation. And no matter what, we have a God who is not overwhelmed in the least bit with the challenges that we face. He's not overwhelmed. His power at work within us guides us through our temptations. He holds us up when we face those difficult winters. He's with us. In the movie, the queen thought she had the upper hand. She really thought she had everybody on their heels. Because of Edmund's selfish decisions and betrayal of his siblings, he has committed treason. And the queen demanded payment in blood. Watch this. It seemed like maybe the queen and Aslan went in the tent and kind of worked things out. She changed her mind, but that's far from what happened. Instead, the king offered himself as a payment for Edmund's sin. He was willing to die on Edmund's behalf and for the salvation ultimately of all of Narnia. The allegory here is pretty clear. Aslan is a representation of Jesus and his sacrifice for us. But the movie kind of brings it to light in a different way. See, Aslan is the king over all of Narnia. What sort of king like that would sacrifice himself for a little boy who has only been in Narnia for a short time? What sort of king would give up his place on the throne and die on behalf of another person, a traitor no less, who selfishly turns his back on others? Well, there's only one king who would do such a thing. Friends, his name is Jesus. That's the most incredibly beautiful thing about the Christmas season, and why I really believe it's not only fun to do Christmas, but important. It is critical that we remember it. Because Jesus was sent to earth as a king, but not a king to lord over people and make them subjects, but instead to give himself as a sacrifice for his kingdom. The king addresses the darkness of winter not by just pushing back or fighting harder, but by sacrificing his own life to pay the penalty. And that's what Aslan did in the movie. He allows the White Witch to mock him, to shave him, and ultimately to kill him on the stone table. But death would not be the end. Watch this last clip. Yay. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it puts life on some of the most incredible gospel truths. Death is not the end. Really, it was just the beginning. Aslan, his resurrection paves the way for victory over the White Witch in just a few minutes in an epic battle, but also provides an opportunity to save the soul of Narnia, to continue with the story. And you may wonder, is that really a Christmas movie? Well, Father Christmas shows up in the movie, okay? So we're going to count it. Seriously, though, the world of Narnia, it adds a layer of imagination and entertainment to the truth about that period of history we talked about earlier, that period between the Old Testament and the New Testament, that intertestamental 400 years, that out of that 400 years of silence, God spoke out of the darkness, and Christmas finally came. Jesus was born. You're probably familiar with a lot of the characters of the Christmas story, Mary and Joseph, and how they were on their way to Bethlehem for a census. Mary was almost full term when Jesus' time had come. In fact, Luke 2, verses 6 and 7 says it like this: while they were there in Bethlehem, the time came for her baby to be born. She gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him snugly in strips of cloth and laid him in a manger because there was no lodging available for them. Imagine what this means, though. That God's Son, the one who will bring light and hope and joy and peace to the world, was born to a peasant couple and laid in a manger, literally where animals usually graze. For me, it's just so hard to imagine that something that enormous, like the light of the world, could be made so small, so humble, so personal. It's hard to imagine that the solution to winter after winter after winter came in the form of a baby, but that's true. That's what God did. And if God has really been born in a manger, then we have a hope today that no other religious system claims to have. If Jesus was truly born like this, it means we have a God who understands us, not just sympathizes with us when we're in the deep depth of winter, but he can really relate to us from the inside of our experience. It means he knows what it's like to feel pain, to be disappointed, to face temptation. He knows what it's like to feel lonely, even in a crowded room. He knows what the feelings of pressures of big decisions that are looming is like. He knows what it's like to live in a dark world where it seems like there are certain pockets that are always dark and like winter. He knows what it's like to feel like Christmas isn't coming anytime soon. He knows what it feels like to lack hope. And thankfully, this baby, Jesus, he grew up and he became a man and he walked among us. And he became God in the flesh. And in order to draw near to us, he had to suffer and die. He was abandoned by his friends. He was crushed by injustice. He was tortured, and he died. Christmas means God came to earth, and Jesus knows what you're going through. So when you talk to him, he doesn't just sympathize. He understands. He's been where we are today, and he has overcome. And he will walk with you through whatever winter you face today, whatever winter you face tomorrow. He is with us. And he understands. Let's pray. God, some of us are just facing some challenging days. It feels like winter, like Christmas is a long way off in life. Some of us have been through those times before, and we recognize, God, that we don't have what it takes to overcome on our own. Really, we need and depend on one who understands and has overcome. And so we just reach out to you today, God, as we launch into this season where we are preparing ourselves for Christmas and looking at the Advent, the preparation, the waiting, the longing for the Messiah. We also know that you have given us the answer in Jesus. May we turn to him in the midst of our most challenging days. In Christ's name we pray.